Let me ask you a question, and don't answer it out loud. Just answer it honestly, inside your own mind. Why is it that so many intelligent, capable, hardworking people spend their entire lives feeling like they're almost there, but never quite free? They work, they hustle, they try, they read books, they listen to podcasts. They tell themselves, I'm doing everything right. And yet, money still feels tight, time still feels scarce, and the future still feels fragile. Now, here's what most people assume. They assume the problem is not enough income, not enough discipline, not enough opportunity, not enough motivation. But if that were true, then smart people would eventually figure it out. And they don't, which means the problem cannot be effort. The problem is pattern. A pattern so subtle, so normalized, so socially accepted that most people never realize they're inside it. And here's the uncomfortable truth. You don't escape patterns by trying harder. You escape patterns by seeing them clearly. Because once you see a pattern, you can no longer unknow it. And once you can't unknow it, you stop playing the game the same way. Let me tell you something that may challenge you. Most people don't fail financially. They succeed at repeating the same invisible money behavior over and over and over again. Different jobs, different paychecks, different years. Same result. Why? Because money does not respond to intention. Money responds to identity and conditioning. And most people are running money software that was installed before they were old enough to question it. Think about it. You were taught how to go to school, follow instructions, be responsible, be realistic, but you were never taught how to think in leverage, separate effort from outcome, use time strategically, or understand how money actually moves. So you did what any intelligent human would do. You adopted the rules of the environment you were raised in. And here's the problem. If the environment itself is flawed, then following the rules guarantees struggle. Now listen to this carefully. The most dangerous money pattern is not overspending. It's not debt. It's not lack of education. The most dangerous money pattern is this: trading your entire life for certainty while quietly hoping for freedom. Read that again in your mind. Trading your life for certainty while hoping for freedom. That contradiction alone traps millions of people because certainty feels safe, and safety feels responsible, and responsibility gets praised. But safety has a hidden cost. Safety caps upside. Safety discourages leverage. Safety trains you to think small, but consistently. And over time, that thinking becomes identity. You stop asking, what's possible? And start asking, what's realistic? And the moment that shift happens, your financial future quietly shrinks. Here's something no one tells you. The money system doesn't reward effort equally. It rewards positioning. Two people can work equally hard. One builds assets, the other builds exhaustion. Two people can earn the same income. One compounds, the other treads water. The difference isn't intelligence. It's the pattern they're operating inside. And most people never question their pattern because everyone around them is running the same one, which makes it feel normal. But normal is not neutral. Normal is programmed. Let me slow this down for a moment. I want you to notice something about your own thinking right now. If you feel a slight tension, a subtle defensiveness, or a voice that says, okay, but what's the solution? That's the pattern trying to stay hidden, because patterns don't want to be seen. Once they're seen, they lose power. And the pattern you're about to uncover has nothing to do with money itself. Money is just the scoreboard. The pattern lives in how you make decisions, what you tolerate, what you delay, and what you tell yourself is normal. Most people believe freedom comes after security, so they sacrifice their best years chasing safety. But here's the paradox. Freedom does not emerge from safety. Freedom emerges from controlled uncertainty, from learning to operate without guarantees, from building internal certainty instead of external dependence. But that idea is terrifying. If you've been conditioned to believe that risk is reckless and stability is virtuous. So instead, people choose the familiar struggle. They call it being responsible, being patient, paying dues. But years later, they look up and realize they didn't build freedom. They just perfected survival. Let me say this clearly. You don't stay stuck because you lack discipline. You stay stuck because your definition of success was handed to you. And definitions shape behavior. If success means a steady paycheck, predictable routines, approval from authority, then your actions will always align with that, even when your soul wants something more. And here's the cruel irony. The very behaviors that help you survive early in life often become the behaviors that block wealth later. Because wealth requires different questions, different tolerance for discomfort, different use of time, different emotional conditioning, and most people never make that shift. Not because they can't, but because no one ever showed them that a different operating system exists. In the next part, we're going to expose the exact money loop most people are trapped in. You'll recognize it immediately. And once you do, you'll never hear phrases like, just work harder, or be patient the same way again. Because patience without strategy is just time passing. And hard work without leverage is just movement, not progress. Stay with me, because awareness is the first break in the chain. There is a specific loop most people live inside. It feels productive, it feels responsible, it even feels like progress. But it isn't. It's a closed system. And once you see it, you'll realize why so many people look busy, yet never actually move forward. Here's how the loop works. You trade time for money. You use money to cover obligations. You recover just enough energy to do it again. Time in, money out, repeat. Now on the surface, this looks like adulthood, paychecks, bills, routines, stability. But stability inside a closed loop isn't stability at all. It's dependency. Because if your income stops when you stop, you're not building wealth. You're renting your life back one paycheck at a time. And here's the part most people never question. They don't ask, does this system lead anywhere? They only ask, can I survive inside it? That question alone locks the pattern in place. Let me tell you why this loop is so dangerous. Because it rewards compliance, not creativity. It rewards showing up, not thinking differently. It rewards consistency, not leverage. It rewards obedience, not ownership. And if you do it long enough, your nervous system adapts. You become excellent at surviving, but terrible at imagining alternatives. Your brain starts optimizing for predictability, approval, short-term relief, not long-term freedom. And when that happens, even opportunity feels like a threat. Here's something most people won't admit. They say they want freedom, but what they actually want is freedom without instability. And that combination doesn't exist. Freedom requires friction, growth requires uncertainty, wealth requires exposure to discomfort. But the loop trains you to avoid all three. So instead of asking, how do I build assets? People ask, how do I get paid more? And that sounds logical until you realize it keeps them trapped in the same structure. Higher income inside the same loop doesn't change the loop, it just upgrades the furniture. Let me give you an example. Two people earn the same salary. One uses extra income to reduce dependency, buy time, build leverage. The other uses extra income to increase lifestyle, increase commitments, increase pressure. Same income, radically different futures. Why? Because one understands the loop, and the other is still hypnotized by it. Now here's where it gets uncomfortable. The loop is reinforced by praise. When you stay inside it, people say, you're doing the right thing. At least you're secure. Don't take unnecessary risks. But notice something. Those voices rarely belong to people who've built real freedom. They belong to people who learned how to cope, and then normalize coping as wisdom. And when everyone around you is coping, escape starts to look irresponsible. Let me ask you something directly. Have you ever felt guilty for wanting more than survival? Have you ever felt like ambition itself was somehow selfish, or unrealistic, or naive? That guilt didn't come from you. It was trained, because a system that depends on compliance cannot afford people who think independently. So it doesn't crush ambition, it softens it. It convinces you to delay it, to wait your turn, to be patient, to earn it later, and years pass. Here's the brutal truth. Most people don't stay stuck because they lack opportunity. They stay stuck because the loop rewards them just enough to stay. Enough money to survive, enough comfort to tolerate it, enough distraction to forget the bigger question. which is this actually building freedom or just keeping me functional? And now I want you to notice something important. As you're listening right now, part of your mind may be scanning for tactics. How do I get out? What's the move? What's the strategy? That's normal. But strategy comes after awareness. Because if you try to escape the loop using the same thinking that created it, you'll just build a more sophisticated version of the same trap. That's why people start side hustles that feel like second jobs, chase income streams that demand constant attention, burn out trying to outwork a broken system. They change activities, but not the underlying pattern. The pattern isn't working a job. The pattern is this belief: my security must come from something outside of me. As long as that belief is running, you will trade autonomy for reassurance. And reassurance is expensive. It costs time, it costs energy, it costs creativity, and eventually, it costs regret. In the next part, we're going to dismantle the belief layer of this pattern. You'll see why smart people often stay stuck longer than average ones, and why the real shift doesn't start with money at all, but with how you relate to uncertainty, identity, and control. Stay with me, because the moment you break the loop mentally, your options multiply fast. And once that happens, going back to normal becomes impossible. Here's something that surprises people. The ones who struggle the longest financially are often the most intelligent, not the least capable, not the least disciplined, the most mentally sharp. And the reason has nothing to do with intelligence itself. It has everything to do with how intelligence gets used. Because intelligence, when trapped in the wrong pattern, doesn't free you. It rationalizes the cage. Smart people are very good at explaining things. Explaining why now isn't the right time. Explaining why this risk doesn't make sense. Explaining why patience is the responsible choice. And those explanations feel logical. They feel grounded. They feel mature. But logic without vision doesn't lead to freedom. It leads to justified delay. Let me show you how this works. When an opportunity appears, the average person feels fear and hesitates. When a smart person sees the same opportunity, they don't just hesitate. They build a case, a well-structured argument for why waiting is wise. They analyze, they forecast, they consider downside scenarios, and all of that feels like progress. But what's actually happening is this: their intelligence is being used to protect certainty, not to expand possibility. And certainty feels good. Certainty feels safe. Certainty calms the nervous system. But certainty is not where wealth is created. Here's a distinction most people miss. There is a difference between being cautious and being conditioned to avoid uncertainty. One is a skill, the other is a prison. And if your identity is built around being smart, you may be unconsciously addicted to being right. Because being right feels better than being free. Think about this carefully. Have you ever talked yourself out of something by saying, I just need more information? I'll wait until the timing is better. I'll do it when things feel more stable. That's not strategy. That's the pattern wearing a lab coat. Here's the uncomfortable truth. Most people are not afraid of failure. They're afraid of looking foolish. They're afraid of making a move that doesn't immediately validate their self-image. And if you've built your identity around being competent, responsible, rational, then uncertainty threatens that identity. So instead of stepping into the unknown, you stay where you're respected, even if you're confined. Let me tell you something that may sting a little. Staying stuck while appearing responsible is socially rewarded. Trying something new and stumbling is socially punished. So the pattern teaches you this lesson early. Don't stand out unless you're sure you'll succeed. But wealth doesn't come from certainty of outcome. It comes from repeated exposure to uncertainty until uncertainty stops controlling you. Now listen closely. The money pattern most people never escape is not just economic. It's emotional. It's a relationship with discomfort. People who stay stuck believe discomfort means danger, instability means irresponsibility, uncertainty means risk without reward. But people who build wealth learn something different. They learn that discomfort is data, instability is temporary, uncertainty is where leverage hides same sensations, completely different interpretations. Here's the shift that almost no one makes. Most people try to use money to eliminate uncertainty. Wealthy people use uncertainty to create money. That inversion alone changes everything. Because once uncertainty stops feeling like a threat, you stop clinging to small, predictable outcomes. You stop asking, what if this doesn't work? And start asking, what if this compounds? Let me slow this down. Compounding does not require perfection, it requires exposure. Exposure to learning curves, exposure to mistakes, exposure to temporary instability. And the pattern you were trained in taught you to avoid all three, which is why the pattern feels so hard to escape. Not because you're incapable, but because you were trained to associate safety with stillness. Here's a powerful realization. You don't need more confidence to break the money pattern. You need tolerance. Tolerance for ambiguity. Tolerance for not knowing. Tolerance for imperfect action. Confidence comes later, but tolerance is what opens the door. In the next part, we're going to talk about time, not as a clock, but as a weapon. You'll see why most people are busy, but poor in leverage, and why escaping the money pattern requires using time in a way you were never taught. Stay with me, because once you change how you relate to time, money stops feeling so heavy and starts feeling strategic. Most people think they don't have enough time. That's not true. What they don't have is control over how their time is used, and that difference is everything, because time, when used correctly, compounds. But time, when used reactively, disappears. And the money pattern you were trained into is designed to keep your time fragmented, not focused. Busy, but not powerful. Active, but not strategic. Here's the trap. You're taught to value time only in terms of hours worked. You trade time for money, then you measure success by how efficiently you can keep doing that. But that's not how wealth works. Wealth doesn't come from how hard you work in time. It comes from what continues to work when you stop. And if nothing works when you stop, then no matter how busy you are, you're still exposed. Let me say this clearly. Time is not scarce. Unleveraged time is scarce, and most people never learn the difference. They fill their days with tasks, obligations, maintenance, consumption. And at the end of the day, they feel tired, but unchanged. Because effort without leverage just resets you to zero. Here's a question that cuts through illusion. If you stopped working for 90 days, what would still produce value? Not what you hope would. What actually would? For most people, the honest answer is nothing. And that realization alone creates a low-grade anxiety that never fully goes away. So they stay busy. Because busyness numbs that fear. The system trains you to use time defensively, to protect income, to maintain lifestyle, to avoid disruption. But defensive use of time never creates expansion. It only maintains position, and maintenance is expensive. It costs energy, it costs attention, it costs your best hours. Let me show you something subtle. Most people use their sharpest mental energy to solve short-term problems. Emails, messages, deadlines, urgencies. Then when it's time to think strategically, they're exhausted, so they delay. I'll think about that later. When things slow down, after this busy season. But the busy season never ends, because the pattern feeds on urgency. Here's a distinction that changes everything. There are two ways to use time. Time as labor, time as investment. Time as labor ends when the effort ends. Time as investment creates something that continues without you. Most people never make the shift because time as investment doesn't feel productive at first. It feels slow, uncertain, invisible. And the pattern you were trained in rewards visible effort, not invisible setup. Think about this. If something doesn't produce immediate feedback, most people abandon it. That's why assets feel boring, systems feel tedious, long-term plays feel risky, but those are the very things that separate freedom from survival. Because wealth is built in the phase where nothing seems to be happening. And that phase scares people. Let me tell you a truth most people avoid. The reason many people say, I don't have time, is because using time strategically would force them to confront uncertainty. And uncertainty threatens identity. If you step out of constant motion, you might ask bigger questions. And those questions demand change. So the pattern keeps you busy to keep you unconscious. Here's where awareness becomes power. The moment you stop measuring time by how full your schedule is and start measuring it by what compounds, your decisions change. You become ruthless with distraction, selective with commitments, intentional with energy, and that alone starts breaking the pattern. In the next part, we're going to talk about identity, the deepest layer of the money pattern. You'll see why people unconsciously protect struggle and sabotage ease, and why escaping the pattern often feels like betraying who you used to be. Stay with me, because once identity shifts, behavior follows automatically. Before money ever becomes a problem, identity becomes a boundary. And this is the part most people never see. Because identity feels personal. It feels fixed. It feels like you. But identity is not who you are. Identity is who you've learned to be in order to survive your environment. Let me explain this carefully. Every system rewards certain behaviors. And over time, those behaviors become habits, beliefs, personality traits. Eventually, they become identity. You don't just act responsible, you are the responsible one. You don't just work hard, you are the hard worker. You don't just play it safe, you are the realistic one. And once a behavior becomes identity, challenging it feels like self-destruction. So even when a new opportunity appears, you don't evaluate it objectively. You ask one silent question: is this who I'm allowed to be? Here's where the money pattern tightens. If your identity is built on stability, reliability, predictability, then freedom feels reckless. If your identity is built on being needed, being dependable, being the provider, then taking risks feels selfish. So instead of asking, what would create leverage? You ask, what would maintain approval? And approval is expensive. It costs you autonomy. Most people don't realize this, but they are loyal to their struggle, not consciously, emotionally, because struggle earned them respect. It earned them validation. It earned them a sense of worth. So when ease appears, it feels unfamiliar, suspicious, even undeserved. And the mind does something fascinating. It sabotages. Let me show you how this plays out. Someone finally gets momentum, extra income, a new opportunity, a break, and suddenly they overcommit. They get distracted. They lose focus. They get busy again. Not because they're lazy, but because ease threatens identity. If you no longer struggle, who are you? This is why so many people say they want wealth, but unconsciously repel it. Wealth changes how people relate to you. Wealth changes expectations. Wealth changes dynamics. And if your identity is built on being the dependable one, the hardworking one, the one who sacrifices, then wealth feels like betrayal. So the pattern pulls you back, quietly, logically, reasonably. Here's a powerful reframe. You are not afraid of failure. You are afraid of outgrowing the version of yourself that earned love and safety. And that fear is deeply human, but it's also deeply limiting. Because wealth requires you to become someone you've never been before. Not morally different, not better, just less dependent on struggle for self-worth. Let me say something important. You do not have to reject who you've been, but you do have to release the idea that suffering is proof of value. Effort is not virtue. Exhaustion is not nobility. Stability is not freedom. And the sooner you separate worth from struggle, the faster the pattern loosens. Here's the shift. Instead of asking, is this safe for me? You begin asking, does this expand me? Instead of asking, what will people think? You ask, what will this allow me to build? And that shift feels uncomfortable at first, because it challenges identity. But identity is flexible once you stop defending it. In the next part, we're going to talk about why most people mistake motion for momentum. You'll see how activity becomes a hiding place, and how to tell the difference between being busy and actually building freedom. Stay with me, because once you stop confusing motion with progress, your energy becomes focused, and the pattern weakens fast. Most people are exhausted, not because they're doing nothing, but because they're doing everything. And that's the trap. Because motion feels productive. Motion feels responsible. Motion feels like effort. But motion without direction is just energy leaking out of your life. Here's the distinction almost no one makes. Motion is activity. Momentum is direction plus accumulation. Motion burns energy, momentum multiplies it, and the money pattern you were trained into keeps you in constant motion so you never build momentum. Let me show you how subtle this is. You wake up, you respond, you react, you solve problems, you handle obligations. At the end of the day, you're tired. So your mind says, I earned rest. But ask yourself something honestly. What moved forward today that will still matter in 5 years? Most people can't answer that question. Not because they're lazy, but because the system rewards urgency, not leverage. Urgency is addictive. It gives you a sense of importance, a reason to stay busy, a way to avoid bigger questions. If everything is urgent, nothing is strategic, and the pattern thrives on that confusion. Here's a truth that cuts through illusion. If your life requires constant attention to not fall apart, you are not building freedom, you're managing fragility. And fragility demands motion, always responding, always adjusting, always fixing, but never building anything that stands on its own. Let me say this clearly. Wealth is not built by people who do more. It's built by people who decide what matters and ignore almost everything else. That takes courage, because ignoring things feels irresponsible when you've been trained to be available, dependable, and busy. Most people confuse effort with effectiveness. They say, I worked all day, but they never ask, did today reduce future effort or guarantee more of it? That question alone reveals everything. Here's where people get stuck. They believe, if I slow down, I'll fall behind. But slowing down strategically is how you stop running in circles, because circles feel like progress until you realize you're standing in the same place. Let me reframe this for you. Every action you take either increases your future freedom or increases your future obligation. Most people unknowingly choose obligation, more commitments, more expenses, more maintenance, because obligation looks like stability. But stability built on constant input is not stable at all. It's fragile. Momentum works differently. Momentum is created when effort today reduces effort tomorrow, decisions compound instead of reset, systems replace willpower. Momentum feels quiet at first. No applause, no urgency, no instant validation, which is why most people abandon it. They mistake silence for failure, but silence is where leverage is built. Here's a powerful realization. If everything you do requires you to be present, you are the bottleneck, and bottlenecks don't scale. Freedom begins the moment you stop being the center of every outcome. The pattern you were trained into says, stay busy so you stay valuable. But value does not come from activity. Value comes from structure. Structure creates repeatability. Repeatability creates leverage. Leverage creates freedom. In the next part, we're going to talk about why most people chase motivation instead of building alignment. You'll see why motivation fades and why disciplined people still get stuck, and how escaping the money pattern has very little to do with trying harder. Stay with me, because once you stop burning energy on motion and start building momentum, everything accelerates. Most people believe motivation is the missing ingredient. They say, I just need to stay motivated. I'll start when I feel ready. I'm waiting for the right mindset. But motivation is not a strategy. Motivation is a reaction, and reactions don't build wealth. Motivation comes and goes. It spikes when you feel inspired. It fades when reality shows up. And if your progress depends on how you feel, your results will always be inconsistent. That's not a character flaw. That's biology. Here's the truth most people don't want to hear. If motivation were enough, everyone who's ever felt inspired would already be free, but they're not. Because motivation doesn't change structure, it doesn't change incentives, it doesn't change patterns, it just gives you a temporary push inside the same system. Let me say this clearly. You do not rise to the level of motivation, you fall to the level of alignment. Alignment means your actions match your goals, your environment supports your behavior, your systems remove friction. When alignment exists, progress feels natural. When it doesn't, effort feels heavy. Most people try to force change inside an environment designed for stagnation. They try to eat better in a house full of junk, build wealth in a system built on dependency, think long-term in a culture obsessed with now, And then they blame themselves when willpower collapses. But willpower was never the problem. Here's something powerful to notice. Look at where you make your worst financial decisions. It's rarely when you're calm and clear. It's when you're tired, overwhelmed, stressed, emotionally charged, and the money pattern feeds on that state because emotional decisions keep you reactive, and reactive people don't build leverage. Alignment works differently. Alignment removes decisions. Instead of asking, "Do I feel like doing this?" you ask, "Is this who I'm becoming?" And that question bypasses emotion because identity-driven behavior doesn't rely on motivation. It relies on consistency. Let me give you an example. People who build wealth don't wake up motivated every day. They wake up aligned. Their systems hammer direct money before they can spend it, protect time before it gets consumed, prioritize leverage before comfort. So even on bad days, progress continues because the system is stronger than the mood. Here's where most people go wrong. They chase motivation instead of designing alignment. They watch videos. They read books. They feel energized. And then nothing changes because inspiration without structure is entertainment, not transformation. The money pattern you were trained into taught you to rely on emotion. Work harder when you feel pressure, rest when you feel exhausted, spend when you feel deprived. That emotional loop keeps you predictable, and predictability is easy to exploit. Breaking the pattern requires one shift. You stop asking, "How do I feel about this?" and start asking, "What does this build?" Does this build freedom, optionality, leverage? Or does it just build relief? Relief feels good in the moment, but relief is temporary. Leverage is permanent. Here's a hard truth. Most people don't actually want freedom. They want relief from pressure, and those are not the same thing. Freedom requires discomfort first. Relief avoids discomfort entirely. And the money pattern trains you to choose relief over freedom again and again. Alignment means choosing discomfort once so you don't have to choose struggle forever. It means saying no early, thinking long-term, delaying gratification strategically, not because it's noble, but because it works. In the next part, we're going to talk about why income alone doesn't change your life. You'll see why raises, bonuses, and windfalls often disappear without impact, and why the pattern resets people back to zero even after they make more money. Stay with me, because this next realization is where many people finally stop blaming themselves and start changing outcomes. Most people believe the answer is more money, a raise, a better job, a bonus, a breakthrough. They tell themselves, "If I just made more, everything would change." But here's the truth. For most people, more money doesn't change the pattern. It feeds it. You've seen this before. Someone earns more and somehow still feels behind. They upgrade their lifestyle. Their obligations grow. Their pressure increases. And now they're earning more, but they're also more trapped. Why? Because income does not create freedom. Structure does. Let me say that again. Income does not create freedom. Structure creates freedom. And if the structure doesn't change, the outcome won't either. Here's what usually happens when income increases. Expenses expand to meet it. Expectations rise. Comfort becomes non-negotiable, and the loop tightens. More to maintain, more to protect, more to lose. So instead of freedom, people feel anxiety, not because money is bad, but because money exposed the weakness of the structure underneath it. This is why so many people earn more but feel just as stressed, get promotions but feel less free, hit milestones but feel emptier. They thought money would solve a structural problem. It can't. Here's the key distinction. Money flowing through you is not the same as money working for you. If money only passes through your hands to cover obligations, you are still the engine, and engines wear out. Most people live in a throughput model. Earn, spend, reset. Even when the numbers get bigger, the model stays the same, and the pattern survives. Let me tell you something most people don't realize. The first time someone makes good money, they often sabotage themselves, not intentionally, structurally. They lock themselves into bigger payments, longer commitments, higher fixed costs, and now they need that income just to breathe. That's not freedom. That's escalation. Here's a powerful question. If your income doubled tomorrow, what would actually change? Not what you'd buy. What would change structurally? Would you buy back time, reduce dependency, create leverage, or would you just live better inside the same loop? That answer tells you everything. Most people never build a buffer, not because they can't, but because the pattern rewards immediate relief. Relief feels good now. Freedom feels abstract, so the pattern wins. Let me introduce a new idea. There are only two uses for money: consumption, reduction of dependency. Consumption feels rewarding. Reduction of dependency feels boring. But boring is where freedom lives, because every dollar that reduces dependency increases optionality, and optionality is power. Here's the shift that changes lives. Instead of asking, "How much do I make?" you start asking, "How dependent am I?" Dependent on income, dependent on stability, dependent on approval, dependent on systems you don't control. And the more dependency you remove, the less pressure money carries. This is why some people feel calm with less income, while others feel panicked with more. The difference is not the number, it's the structure. The money pattern teaches you to chase increases instead of redesigning the system. But redesigning the system is the only thing that breaks the loop. In the next part, we're going to talk about leverage, not as a buzzword, but as a mindset shift. You'll see why leverage feels uncomfortable at first, and why almost everything meaningful in life comes from learning how to use it correctly. Stay with me, because leverage is the turning point where effort finally starts paying dividends. Leverage is one of the most misunderstood ideas in money, because people think leverage means risk, debt, complexity, aggression. And that misunderstanding keeps them trapped in effort. But leverage is not about force. Leverage is about position. Let me simplify this. Effort is linear. You put in 1 unit of effort, you get 1 unit of result. When effort stops, results stop. Leverage is nonlinear. One decision, one system, one asset can continue producing long after the effort is finished. That's the difference. The money pattern conditions you to believe, if I'm not working, nothing is happening. That belief alone keeps people exhausted, because it makes rest feel dangerous. But leverage works quietly. It doesn't announce itself. It compounds in the background while you're doing other things. Here's the uncomfortable part. Leverage feels inefficient at first. You work, and nothing seems to happen. No immediate payoff, no instant validation, no applause. And the pattern whispers, "This isn't working. Go back to what you know." Most people listen, and that's why they never escape. Let me give you a powerful reframe. Effort feels productive because it produces feedback. Leverage feels uncomfortable because it produces delay. But delay is not failure. Delay is incubation, and incubation is where compounding begins. Think about this. If effort were the answer, the hardest working people would be the wealthiest. But they're not, because effort alone does not scale. Leverage does. There are only a few true forms of leverage: time, systems that work repeatedly; skill, knowledge that compounds; capital, money working for money; media, messages reaching many; code or content, once built, used endlessly. Most people are trained to use only one: time. And time is the weakest form, because time is finite. The pattern teaches you to sell time because it's easy to understand. Show up, get paid, repeat. Leverage requires a different mindset. You have to accept delayed reward, uncertain outcomes, imperfect progress. That scares people who were trained to be responsible. Here's a truth that changes perspective. Leverage is not reckless. Lack of leverage is reckless, because it leaves you exposed. One illness, one disruption, one change in circumstance, and everything stops. That's not safety, that's fragility. People who escape the money pattern don't gamble. They design. They ask, how do I reduce the number of times I have to trade hours for income? How do I build once and benefit many times? How do I turn effort into assets? Those questions change behavior immediately. Here's where resistance shows up. You might be thinking, this sounds good, but it's not realistic for me. That thought is not yours, it's conditioned. Because if it were truly unrealistic, Others wouldn't be doing it quietly all around you. They're just not announcing it. Let me say something important. You don't need massive leverage to break the pattern. You need some. Enough to change your relationship with time. Enough to create breathing room. Enough to realize I don't have to live inside constant urgency. That realization alone is freeing. In the next part, we're going to talk about the moment people actually break the pattern. Not when they get rich, not when they quit their job, but the internal decision that changes how they operate forever. Stay with me, because this is where effort stops feeling heavy and strategy takes over. Most people think the money pattern breaks when something external changes. A new job, a new income stream, a lucky break. But that's not when it breaks. The pattern breaks before anything changes on the outside. It breaks the moment you stop asking for permission from the life you've been surviving. There is a very specific internal shift that separates people who stay trapped from people who eventually build freedom. It's not confidence, it's not courage, it's not knowledge. It's this decision. I am no longer optimizing my life for short-term comfort. That's it. That one line quietly rewires everything. Most people optimize for comfort without realizing it. Comfort in predictable routines, familiar struggle, known limits, social approval. And comfort is seductive. It feels safe. It feels responsible. It feels justified. But comfort is expensive because comfort delays growth. The moment someone stops optimizing for comfort, their decisions change. They start tolerating temporary instability, awkward transitions, learning curves, quiet progress, not recklessly, intentionally. And that's when the pattern loses its grip. Here's what that looks like in real life. Instead of asking, will this be uncomfortable? They ask, will this compound? Instead of asking, is this safe right now? They ask, does this reduce my dependency long term? Those questions don't feel emotional, they feel calm. And calm decisions outperform emotional ones every single time. Let me tell you something important. People who escape the money pattern are not fearless. They are comfortable being uncomfortable. They've trained their nervous system to stop panicking at uncertainty, and that training changes behavior automatically. Here's a realization that stops self-blame. You were not weak for choosing comfort. Comfort kept you alive. Comfort kept you accepted. Comfort kept you functioning. But what keeps you alive does not always keep you free, and freedom requires a new operating system. This is where many people hesitate. They think, if I stop optimizing for comfort, I'll be reckless. But the opposite is true. Comfort-driven decisions are reactive. Long-term decisions are strategic, and strategy feels calm, not impulsive. Let me say this clearly. Breaking the money pattern does not require burning your life down. It requires redirecting your effort away from immediate relief, constant reassurance, endless consumption, and toward assets, skills, systems, ownership. That shift doesn't announce itself. It happens quietly. And then one day you look back and realize you're no longer trapped. Here's the part most people don't expect. Once you make this decision, you stop needing motivation, because motivation is what you need when you're fighting yourself. Alignment removes that fight. In the next part, we're going to talk about why escape happens gradually, then suddenly. You'll see why nothing seems to work until everything does, and why patience, when paired with leverage, becomes unstoppable. Stay with me, because you're closer than you think, and the pattern is already loosening. There's a phase almost everyone goes through right before the pattern breaks, and it's the most dangerous phase of all, because it feels like nothing is working. You're making better decisions. You're thinking long-term. You're choosing leverage over comfort. And yet, on the surface, life looks the same. Same routines, same responsibilities, same pressure. And this is where most people quit, not because they're incapable, but because they mistake latency for failure. Here's what's actually happening. When you change direction, momentum doesn't show up immediately. Old systems are still running. Old obligations still exist. Old patterns are unwinding. That takes time. And the mind hates time without feedback. So it says, this isn't working. But it is. It's just working beneath the surface. Let me explain this clearly. Compounding has a delay, always. The early phase looks flat, uneventful, Unimpressive. That's because the visible results lag behind the internal shift. But once compounding crosses a threshold, progress accelerates fast. And when it does, people on the outside call it luck. It isn't. It's accumulation. Most people quit in the quiet phase. They go back to comfort, back to urgency, back to motion without momentum. Not because the strategy failed, but because patience was never trained. Here's a powerful reframe. The quiet phase is not a test of strategy. It's a test of identity. Can you keep acting like the person you're becoming before the environment confirms it? That's the question. People who escape the money pattern don't wait for validation. They validate themselves internally. They decide, this is who I am now, regardless of external feedback. And that decision stabilizes behavior. Let me say something that may calm you. If you feel discouraged during this phase, it does not mean you're doing it wrong. It means you're early. And early always feels lonely. Here's how you know you're on the right track. You feel less reactive, less desperate, less emotionally tied to outcomes. You stop chasing quick wins and start building quietly. That emotional shift is the signal. Not income, not views, not applause. The pattern weakens when you stop needing proof. Because proof arrives after consistency, not before. There's a moment that eventually arrives. One day something clicks. An opportunity lands. An asset pays off. A system starts working. And suddenly the pressure eases. Not because life is perfect, but because you're no longer trapped. And from that point on, going back feels impossible. In the final part, we're going to bring this together. You'll hear what to focus on daily, what to ignore completely, and how to live outside the money pattern without needing permission or validation. Stay with me, because freedom doesn't arrive loudly. It arrives quietly, and then it stays. At this point, something should feel different. Not dramatic, not emotional, quieter, clearer. Because when a pattern breaks, it doesn't explode. It dissolves. Most people expect freedom to feel euphoric. It doesn't. Freedom feels stable. It feels like options. It feels like space. It feels like no longer being rushed by invisible forces. And that's how you know the money pattern no longer owns you. Let me bring this together simply. People who never escape the money pattern spend their lives reacting. Reacting to bills. Reacting to pressure. Reacting to fear. Reacting to time. People who escape it start designing. They design how their time is used, where their energy goes, what compounds, what no longer deserves attention. Design replaces reaction, and reaction is where the pattern lives. Here's what living outside the pattern actually looks like. You stop trying to win every month. You start thinking in years. You stop chasing relief. You start building leverage. You stop explaining yourself. You start trusting your direction. And most importantly, you stop asking, is this enough? And start asking, is this aligned? Alignment becomes your compass, not urgency, not approval, not comparison, alignment. Does this reduce dependency? Does this create optionality? Does this compound over time? If the answer is yes, you move forward calmly. If the answer is no, you let it go without guilt. That's freedom. Here's the paradox. When you stop obsessing over money, money becomes easier to manage. When you stop chasing it emotionally, you make better decisions. Because desperation distorts judgment, and clarity multiplies results. Let me say something important. Escaping the money pattern does not require you to become someone else. It requires you to become more intentional, more selective, more patient, more strategic, and less reactive. There will still be challenges. Uncertainty doesn't disappear, but it stops controlling you because you've learned something fundamental. You don't need certainty to move forward. You need direction, and direction, once chosen, simplifies everything. Most people wait for permission. Permission from money, permission from circumstances, permission from others. But permission never comes. Freedom is self-authorized, quietly, decisively, without announcement. If there's one thing I want you to take with you, it's this. You don't escape the money pattern by doing more. You escape it by seeing clearly, choosing intentionally, and staying aligned long enough for leverage to do its work. You are not late. You are not behind. You were simply taught a pattern that optimized survival, not freedom. Now you see it, and once a pattern is seen, it loses its grip. Take this with you. Build quietly. Think long-term. Design instead of react. And trust this. Freedom doesn't arrive all at once. It arrives in layers. And you've already stepped into the first one. Before we end this, there's something critical you need to understand. Insight alone does not change lives. Awareness opens the door, but action is what moves you through it. And not massive action, not dramatic action, not life-blowing up action, just aligned action. Because most people don't fail to escape the money pattern because they don't know what to do. They fail because they try to do too much at once, then retreat back into comfort when it feels overwhelming. We're not doing that. We're doing this cleanly, intentionally, strategically. Let me reframe something important. Progress is not about doing more. Progress is about doing the right two things consistently before the world forces you to. And today, right now, there are only two actions that matter. Not 10, not 20. 2. If you do these two things, and you actually do them, you will feel a shift immediately. Not financially, internally. And internal shifts always come first. Action item number 1, expose the pattern on paper. Here's what you're going to do today, not tomorrow, not someday. Today, you are going to take a blank piece of paper or open a note, and you are going to write one honest sentence. This sentence, right now, my money pattern looks like this. And then you finish it, without editing, without justifying, without explaining it away. For example, I trade time for money and hope nothing goes wrong. I rely on my job for security and avoid long-term risk. I stay busy so I don't have to think about bigger moves. I earn enough to survive, but not enough to feel free. There is no correct answer. There is only honesty. Because here's the truth. A pattern that stays vague stays powerful. A pattern that gets named starts to weaken. Most people never write this down. They keep it abstract. And abstraction protects the pattern. Clarity breaks it. Once it's written, read it once. That's it. No fixing, no solving, no action yet, just awareness. That alone creates separation between you and the pattern, and separation is freedom's first form. Action item number 2, redirect 1 hour. Just one now. Here's the second action, and this is where momentum begins. You are going to take 1 hour, not every day, not forever, just 1 hour today, and you are going to redirect it. 1 hour that normally goes to scrolling, consuming, escaping, or reacting. And you're going to use that hour for one leverage activity, not 10. 1. Examples. Learning a skill that compounds building a system instead of responding to messages, creating something that can be reused. Studying how money actually moves, not how people talk about it. The rule is simple. This hour must reduce future effort, not increase it. If it only helps today, it doesn't count. If it builds something that lasts, it does. And here's the most important part. You do this hour without expecting results. No checking, no judging, no asking, is this working? This hour is not about payoff. It's about identity. Because the moment you redirect time toward leverage, even once, you stop being someone who only reacts. And once that happens, the pattern has lost its monopoly. Why these two actions work: action number 1 gives you clarity. Action number 2 gives you agency. Clarity without agency leads to frustration. Agency without clarity leads to chaos. Together they create alignment, and alignment is what makes progress feel calm instead of forced. Let me leave you with this. You do not need to escape the entire money pattern today. You only need to step outside it briefly, just long enough to prove to yourself that you are not trapped. That proof changes behavior, and behavior, repeated calmly over time, changes outcomes. Do these two things today, not perfectly, not dramatically, just honestly. And tomorrow you will not be free, but you will be different. And different is how freedom begins.